Hello and welcome to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. It's just me, Julie Brown, this time. I'm just here to introduce you to our episode for the season, the upcoming holiday season. The Red, David, and I all think it's very important that we are acknowledging the challenges that can come with this season. And we wanted to do an episode, but then we were very aware that we had actually already done an episode last year called Unwrapping the Holidays. So we went back and we had a listen, and we determined that although there are some things we would probably say differently, because that happens with every episode we listen to, that our messages and what we had to offer would still be very similar. So we're going to re-release that episode, and we hope that you'll consider giving it a listen. Just a note in terms of having the episode be as supportive and beneficial to you as possible. The first half of it, for approximately the first 30 minutes, is really speaking to the idea of what if this is my last Christmas, or what if I'm a caregiver or family member of someone who's on the palliative journey and this is maybe their last Christmas. So it's really speaking to the end of life journey during the holiday season. The second half is devoted to grief and loss in the holiday season, knowing that this is a time of year that can really rekindle grief, even very, very old grief in the past. Or, of course, there are those that are approaching this season for the very first time through the lens of how do I move through the holiday season without the person that I love being here. So please have a listen. Listen to it all. Listen just to the part that feels like it really connects with your situation. And lastly, we just want to send out our blessings, our gratitude for everyone who listens, and our blessings to everyone who will listen, knowing that this can be a hard road to travel at this time of year. And we feel it, we're aware of it. We want you to hear our compassion and our care in our words in this episode, and hope that knowing that we speak these words means that we've either lived it or have walked with people who have lived it, which may help you to feel not so alone, like you're not the only one having to do this. Okay, so all the best of the season. May, even in the darkest days, there be a light for you that shines through, that pierces the darkness, and our blessings to all of you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome back. Thanks for joining us for another episode of What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. And I'm back here in the studio with my friends and colleagues,
David Kennedy
and Red Keating.
And I'm Julie Brown. Thanks for joining us again. So today, we're recording this podcast, of course, a few weeks earlier than it will air. We're in mid-November, and we felt as a group it was really important that we gather and we begin the conversation, exploration about the holidays that are coming as we move towards the end of the year.
And it's certainly something that I think people who are in grief or who are living with life-threatening illness where it's coming closer to the end of life for them, I mean, they start thinking about these major holidays really early. Sometimes, I would have them start to talk about it in August, being anxious about what's going to happen at Christmas.
That's right.
I think it's important for us to have this conversation and have it available so that people, have a chance to listen to some things because they're certainly thinking of them.
So I know that we wanted to kind of give some attention to both people and their families who are living with life-threatening illness, who are maybe receiving palliative care, or maybe just an awareness that this may be their last holiday season, their last Christmas season. So we're going to give some time to that today. And we're also going to give some space just to talking about grief in general in the holidays, both grief from a more, for those who are more kind of acutely, or what we might think of kind of a little more raw or right there on the surface. But, the holidays are also a time for those of us grieving, where grief is maybe much more off in the past. It can still really come roaring up at this time of year.
And I think that's the significance of certainly from a Christmas point of view. And I think it's important that we kind of establish the fact that there are many holidays,
of course,
during this season. And I it's hard for us to kind of have a conversation around all of them. And I think that what we talk about is applicable to people who face the holidays in their traditions. But perhaps for ease, for us tonight to have this conversation, we can use Christmas as kind of the base holiday around which we are talking, recognizing that there are many, many holidays that happen in this time. But I think that getting back to what you were saying, Julie, how it can trigger those pieces of grief from many years ago, it's because Christmas has this focus on memory. It's about our past. It's all the romanticized ideas of our childhood and our rituals and the traditions. They're really rooted in the past and who we are, and so much of our own identity and our family identities. So it doesn't surprise me what you just said, how even a grief that has been with us for many, many years, it takes sometimes these holidays are the key to bring that back up, because it's a natural reminder of our past and our memory.
It's and family as well. I mean, the focus of Christmas is a family, and of course, if you're living with a life-threatening illness, you're probably thinking about your family. If you're grieving someone, then you've lost someone from your family. You put all that together then with the expectations that come with this time of year. And I mean, there were Christmas things on TV before Halloween was even over this year. And so it's just it's when you talked about it, people are talking about it maybe in August or thinking about it in August. Well, my gosh, society is pushing it forward and pushing it up the calendar to earlier and earlier. And so it's on people's minds sooner and sooner. And so then that expectation grows. What do we do inside our family in whatever the situation is that we're in, right?
So maybe let's jump in on that note, talking about, we have the family that's dealing with a life-threatening illness, where there's a life-threatening illness and an awareness as they move towards the Christmas holiday season that this may be the last Christmas for the person. Let's start there.
And I think those are often difficult things in families, because it often is unspoken.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody's thinking it and aware of it, but it's almost like I can't say it out loud.
It almost feels like a betrayal. Like, am I giving up hope?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if the death is not imminent.
Right.
So if the person's not actively dying and has still some time left, then kind of saying, well, this might be the last Christmas, can almost feel like, oh, am I giving up on dad, or am I giving up on, on that person? So yeah, sometimes it's when there's not, people are thinking about it, they're feeling it, but the words might not have been said.
Yeah, it's hard to predict that unknown, and yet we're all sitting there with it. It is that silent acknowledgement that can happen when everyone's thinking it. Everyone's going, this could be the last one. So what are we going to do to make it special? We won't say why we're doing it this way this year, but we're going to do it. We're going to and what is the expectation then on that? If this could potentially be the last Christmas, what should it look like?
So I think that's where it might be good to begin with, just saying, if that's where you find yourself as a family, perhaps the courage to begin to voice and to give permission for people to voice those fears. And it is it really is an expression that is filled with anxiety and anxiousness and some fear and sadness. I mean, such a cauldron of emotions that are boiling. But what if we begin with encouraging people as a family to maybe have a chance to voice that, so that then, rather than all those things being done clandestine, we can actually plan some things that might be helpful.
I think we can say that. Sorry, Red.
That's
I think there's a way we can voice that, especially if that's kind of goes against the family norms of really being kind of assertive in talking about what needs to be talked about. I think we can say something about, I sure hope this isn't the last Christmas. And I'm going to keep wishing that that's maybe not the case. But we also have this information that sits there that tells us it could be. So we can hold hope, and we can also be mindful of where we sit right now in the trajectory of the progression of this disease or this condition. And let's do some planning around that, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's okay to voice that and still maintain hope and still, like, how would I call that? Reasonable hope, or, compassionate hope.
Yeah, realistic hope.
Realistic hope,
Right.
yeah.
It's like, it's always, I just had it, darn, I lost it. But it's that sense of, if you say the truth out loud, it doesn't mean that you're going to make it happen, in the sense that if we acknowledge this today, that acknowledgement is not what's going to bring the end to come.
Yeah, that's magical thinking.
That's magical thinking.
That's right.
However, if we acknowledge it, then we're able to have realistic hope, celebrate in a way that maybe is a little bit different, maybe a little bit more, in our words and thinking, maybe more special, because we know this could be. But it allows us to hold on to that hope that's realistic. And it pushes aside that sense of magical thinking that if we say it out loud, then it's going to happen. What you will find out if you don't say it out loud, it'll happen too.
That's right.
But so acknowledging it might actually open up an ability to feel freer and to enjoy it a little bit better, knowing that everybody's understanding, we're all on the same page.
And the challenge, of course, is that that within family that may present some blockages. So sometimes
That's right.
the person who's living with that life-threatening illness wants to say that, but they hold themselves back because they're afraid that it will appear like they are giving up hope, like you mentioned, Julie. Or sometimes it's the reverse. Sometimes family are sensing that, and they have a realistic understanding of the disease progression, but the person isn't willing to do that yet. And as we've talked about before, that palliative diagnosis is a journey that everybody comes to in their own time. So if that was a fairly recent diagnosis, say within 6 months, they're still processing that. And so Christmas might be a bit of a challenge with people in different places. But if we can, then I think it allows us to do things that help down the road. So looking back, I often have families who have said to me, I'm so glad we did that. But I've also had families who have said to me, I wish we'd have done that. So I think, we look at this not just in that moment, but how does this impact both the family during this Christmas season, but how does it impact their understanding of that as they progress through their grief down the road?
Well, and the effect of those two statements is so clear. I'm glad we had done that. Brings a sense of comfort, brings a sense of peace. I wish we had done that has the potential to, foster regret, right? And certainly comfort is a much nicer feeling to have in your grief than regret. I was just thinking when you were talking there, David, that people in families might not agree on how to do it. Brothers and sisters can disagree. Parents with children can disagree. How is, like, we're talking maybe idealistically during what really is an idealistic time. I mean, that holiday season is set up as an ideal. There's an ideal that we think we're supposed to attain in that.
Which we struggle with under the best of circumstances.
Under the best of times.
Yeah.
But when you have individuals in a family disagreeing with how to sort of address the elephant in the room and address the coming holiday, whether we say it or we don't, that can create great tension that needs to also be given its time to try to work through, right? And so there's some preparation to all of this in terms of making sure all the players can find their way to the playing field. And then you've got to be able to agree to the rules of the game that you're playing, right? And that can create situations in families where if you can't get agreement, then it becomes very difficult. And then the Christmas time can become very tense.
So starting that process early enough that we can kind of get those things into perspective. Yeah. And the realization, I think, if we were start to look at practical things that are important, I think one of the, again, challenges to this that have to be considered is this, you mentioned that, Brad, this idealism or this romanticizing around Christmas, and sometimes people then want to do too much, and the individual who's living with this just isn't able to. That's right. So it sets up for failure, and then we're really in trouble if that sense of failure is present.
Yeah. I was going to say, you know, when you start to have that communication, we need to be really realistic about what's possible, both for the person who is maybe ill and also all the other people. And the reality is even if our most, you know, fervent wish, hope is that it's special, you know, capital letter special, that it can't always all be special. It's not every moment. It's, you know, so plan one thing, or plan one or two things that feel really important to the family. If there's a special, you know, if there is a tradition, or if there is something that, you know, has always been really cherished by the family, then we put our efforts there. But we can't put our efforts into every hour of, you know, for several days, because nobody can maintain that. And if that is our expectation, then there's going to be disappointment. There's going to be there's you know, we're not heading in a good direction probably there for people. So be really realistic about energy, you know, about our energy, about our focus, and about what we can just sustain and maintain during that time.
And I think for me, it might be important to think of this in terms of, all right, we start with the core family, and it's maybe a matter of beginning with the individual who's living with a life-threatening illness, who this may be their last Christmas. Maybe it's important to start with them to say, what's important to you?
Yes.
What are the things? We can't do everything. We probably can't go, and we're going to limit who can come. But what is it what are one or two things? And I like that, Julie, about simplifying, you know, this down to what's one or two things that are really important for you this Christmas. And then we could branch that off to the rest of the family with everybody just putting it out there. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but giving a chance to voice what is important to them during this last Christmas.
Yeah, like that sense of flexibility, so that if you have traditions, you don't have to stick so rigidly to them to say, this is what Christmas is, right? It has to be this or it's not Christmas. Well, it's a different Christmas. And so as a result, you can give yourself permission to say, this Christmas is a bit more flexible. This Christmas, we might have to do things differently. It might not be this way the next Christmas. You know, we might come back to our traditions, and that's okay. But what traditions and things that we usually normally do can we be flexible about this year, so that we do put our energy, like you said, Julie, into the things that are most important, and maybe, like you said, David, into the things that are most important to the person who might be living with the life-threatening illness.
I'm thinking of, if I could just tell a personal story, the year we were going into Christmas where we had some idea, not fully clear, that was probably going to be my father's last Christmas. And our family is just full of traditions from the 24th to the 26th. They're very full days. When we knew he didn't have that energy, but he still wanted to maintain many of them, right? So, for example, our family has always gone to Christmas Eve service, always, never missed a year. That was a year we missed because there was no way he could do that, and the crowds and the walking in from the parking lot, and still have enough energy to be there on Christmas morning to watch his grandchildren. And so, there was this, like, we let some things go and we let other things not go. And then it was, well, rather than doing that on Christmas Day afternoon, he's going to go home and have a nap, but then he's going to be able to come for dinner. Right. And so there was just this, there had to be some elasticity to be able to say, we're still going to be together. We're still going to hold true to some of our traditions. And there's a few that we're just needing to put aside. And that's okay.
And I think I've listened to families as they've talked about those things, Julie, and even listening to you there, I recognize that what becomes the meaningful pieces around Christmas are the relational pieces, being with your family, being with the grandkids, versus doing the Christmas Eve service or doing the whatever that activity was. It's not the activity that holds the importance. It's the relational pieces around that hold that importance. The one story I have of a family I worked with, and in this case, everybody understood that this was going to be his last Christmas. He was probably within a month. And he had 3 adult children, 2 daughters and a son, and his wife. And when we talked together about what was important for him and with his family, he said, I want to be together in the bed. And he had this hospital bed in the thing. And here all of them are in bed with him. And they just were there for about an hour and a half Christmas morning. And that's all he wanted, was just to have that closeness, that physical connection, no matter how old his kids were. It was that, and I'm sure that's tied to the memories when they were young. But for him, that's all he wanted and needed. And it was such an incredible moment of to see that and hear about that. Yeah.
How beautiful that he could articulate it and he could ask for what he wanted. Because we can get lost in all of the typical agenda or traditions.
Yeah.
Couple thoughts back on what you said, Julie, about that situation with your dad being tired. I think one of the other things we need to also acknowledge is that it's tired can be tiring differently for everybody else too.
Yes.
In that they're carrying a different emotional weight during that Christmas time. And so, when we're thinking about the person that we're centered around, yes, being flexible, but also then sort of being kind to yourself to say, maybe it's also good for me not to have all the pressures of maybe putting on a great big meal and being the one that gets all the gifts and hosting and all that kind of stuff. How can I be flexible there? Because I might be carrying a very different emotional load through this Christmas than Christmas's past, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because if I could just expand on my story a little, one of the things my sisters and I were aware of afterwards, that we didn't go the extra distance that Christmas in the way that we thought that we would. And we asked ourselves later, like, why didn't we make that more special? Why didn't we? Well, we had just come through an exhausting, crisis-filled fall with his health. We were kind of numb. We were exhausted. And we did the best we could through that Christmas. So in many ways, we weren't super intentional because he was tired and ill. And as you say, Red, we were tired too. So did we still have a really nice Christmas? We did. But was it filled with lots of, we have to make this super special? No, because in some ways we were all just, we were in the deep end at that point, and we were just trying to stay afloat.
Yeah. And again, I think that's a good reminder for the family too, is that it may not be the memories may not be the activity pieces. The memories will be the relational pieces.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's best facilitated by just being together.
That's right.
And you don't need those big and moments that often, and again, those are the hallmark things that we buy into, as if those are the things that are going to give us the meaning.
Mhm.
But it's being together, it's storytelling, it's just listening, it's
Mhm.
those are incredible, meaningful activities that I think, and so if we were to talk about practical things around that, I mean, that's one of them for me is having a storytelling. I mean, if the person is able, having them tell the stories of their Christmas history, right? And when they were a child, and those memories of Christmas for them. And then each of us, sharing that, what's my best memory of that, that honesty of just being open and talking together, that intimacy. I think that's the key.
That reminds me of a couple things. I'll say to people, when your loved one dies, you become their storyteller. You carry their stories, and there's always time to collect new stories, to add to your repertoire, so that as you are the continuer of the carrying on of those stories, you have as many stories as you can carry. And that then brings the person forward into life through you. I'm not sure if this fits, but I'll say it anyway. I was just thinking of a family where they weren't sure if their loved one was going to make it through to the Christmas, that this was going to be the last Christmas or no Christmas at all. And what they decided to do was they had Christmas anyway, 7 weeks early.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they did the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've seen that happen too.
Yeah.
And
me
what
too.
a great place to put your energy, because Christmas was important to their loved one. And we said to them, well, what are you waiting for? Put the tree up. You're going to leave. It's coming anyway. They got presents. They did, and they had a whole great big Christmas, like in early November. It was maybe it was around this time actually. And it was wonderful. And they were so glad they did it, because their loved one didn't make it to have the last Christmas. So if they had waited, they wouldn't have the Christmas before would have been the last Christmas, and they wouldn't have had the experience that they had. And so a lot of courage, a lot of planning and effort went into it, but how wonderful it was. They were so happy that they had the Christmas, that they had their last Christmas, because they weren't going to get it if they waited.
What a great,
But they didn't know that before. So, and I said, what's the worst that can happen? You get 2 Christmases, like
great story.
and like I said, I don't know how it fits there, but it pulls it back even further to that sense of, if you're in that group where you're not sure if you're going to get this Christmas, why not have an early one?
I
Well,
love that.
and if we broaden it even beyond this, and this will apply, I think we can also start moving into talking about grief, it's having that mental flexibility around these things we can be really rigid about, like our traditions, like Christmas happens on a specific day. Like we always do this, and then we always go to Aunt Mary's house, and then we always do, that is the way we do it. It's starting to just give ourselves permission to be a bit elastic in the way that we start to work with these things. And whether this is around our grief and what we can cope with, or whether this is, for the family, for the individual who's ill, it's just asking ourselves, like, does that need to stay that way? Just because it's always been that way? Does it need to be that way? What's a different way that we can do this?
If there's one more thing I can just go back to around the last Christmas scene, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, how people are afraid to hold the opposite emotions.
Yes.
So we can imagine if that was our family, or even me as that person this last Christmas, trying to be up and happy all the time, knowing that this is last Christmas. It's not about one or the other. It's about carrying both.
Right.
And sometimes that change can happen from laughter to tears in a matter of seconds.
That's right.
And I think giving families permission to hold all of those emotions openly without the fear that it's bringing other people down or creating a problem, but that we can express how we feel. And it's going to be all of those things. We'll be laughing, we'll be crying, we don't know what we're feeling sometimes in those moments. It's just, there are no words to explain it. But then the joy that we get too out of those moments of a connection, right? So I think it's important that people have permission to feel the full realm of their emotional responses.
When I use the term mental elasticity, but emotional elasticity as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's be flexible.
Yeah.
And that's also a way of being kind to ourselves and to each other. It's a gentleness, right? When we allow all of that to be present, when we allow ourselves to drop the expectation of things being a certain way, it's really a way to extend kindness and compassion to ourselves and each other.
Right.
Yeah. Can we move into talking about grief and the holidays? Let's begin by talking about it's a new grief. And by that, let's say last 6 months. I mean, I don't have to say it. Could be 3 months. It could be 9, whatever. But it's still relatively new in the past year.
Right. Pretty raw.
Pretty raw.
Yeah. And for me, and when I'm talking to individuals like that who are particularly raw and may not have a lot of support, my encouragement to them is that, okay, this Christmas, this is unique. This is like no other Christmas you have ever experienced. So here's the goal. How do you survive?
Yes.
And it's not a matter of trying to make it some meaningful big thing. We can look at that next Christmas. But what about this one? What do you need to do to get yourself through this?
That's right.
Without more woundedness? What's important for you to survive?
There's that's a probably a very comforting message, but potentially also a difficult message for the individual to hear, right? Because if they're in survival mode, at a time when you're supposed to be in jolly mode, when you're supposed to be in elf mode and joy mode, it's really difficult to say I'm in survival mode. And inside that, then I think that takes a lot of courage for the person to say, I know myself, and if I can be true to myself, I will do what I can do to get through. And if that's very little, then that's okay. But I think it's a good message, and it's the right message. But that's got to be really hard, because we're back to that concept of the expectation of this time is happy, 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 joy, 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 activity, 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 eat, drink, be merry. Right? When you don't feel like doing anything,
it's permission.
Yeah,
it's really in this like very deep way. It's permission to attend to our own needs, to drop the expectation. I mean, it's the ultimate form of self-compassion, I think, is to really say, how am I going to get through this? And I give myself permission to say yes or no to whomever, to myself, to whatever I need to survive it. And that is, I agree with you, Red, that is so hard for us to do as human beings, and yet so necessary, perhaps.
And I think the difficulty comes not just from within ourselves, which is true, because we feel we should be able to do these things, right?
Should.
We feel we've always done it, so why can't I do it? So it begins in there, but it's also the expectations and of other people on us, right? And so, and again, it's a confusing thing, because people, I think there are people who really feel they're doing the best by trying to fix this for the person, right? Like they're trying to say, well, look, we're having a party. Of course you need to come. And
Yeah, please
and,
come over. You'll
please
feel
come,
better.
You'll feel good. And
Yeah.
so there's, there's this need to have them, busy and active in those things, because that will make everybody else feel like they're doing okay. So, that permission piece is really big, both from within and also permission to say no to people outside, and having that conversation with them and just saying, look, and especially for the fresh grief, I say, you have to have this conversation. Just say, look, this isn't the way it's always going to be, probably, but this Christmas, this is what I need. And if you are a good friend or family member, then you will respect what I'm saying to you right now.
If you want to support me, and I know you want to support me, this is what support could look like this Christmas.
Right.
Is let me not go to this party, or like let me off the hook for this or that,
or give me permission. So often I will say, rather than trying to go to every invitation, find one or two that you feel might be okay for you, but have this conversation with them ahead of time. Look, I'd like, you've invited me to come for dinner. I think I'd like to come. I won't know until the day of. So if you're okay with me not confirming until the day of, or even the hour before, if you're okay with that, then I'll say yes. But if you're not okay with that, then I'll say no right now.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, when I do go, I can't promise how long I can stay. So if you're okay if I just come and have supper, and I may not even be able to stay around, I may need to go. If you're okay with that, then that's a safe place for me to go. If you're not okay and you're expecting me to stay and have conversation and all of that, then I'll say no right now.
Yeah. I'm just going to flip it for a second, because the flip side to all of that is, if you do get engaged in something and you do start to have a bit of fun, that's okay too.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
okay to be
It's
happy.
if you catch yourself mistakenly having fun and you go, oh my God, I'm supposed to be sad, I shouldn't be having fun,
Right.
then no, it will also be okay that if you do choose to do something and you are enjoying yourself, that's okay too. It's
That's
okay.
your moment of that. That's how that moment is showing up.
And I think I think when in my head, I think it's being open to the full range of human emotion, even in this sort of very different time, right? So that if I love your statement there, David. I'll tell you the day I'm going to come, if that day, and if that's okay with you, then that's great, because I don't know how I'm going to feel when I wake up. But if I go and I have fun, I think that should be not something then we go home and feel guilty about.
Exactly.
That we weren't thinking about our loved one, that for a moment we weren't in the depths of our sorrow, that for a moment being with our family elevated us up a little bit and buoyed us up and made us feel better. That's okay too. So we have to be open to the full range of human emotion, and allow them just to be.
Be present.
Right? Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right, because and again, the other piece to that is that, people have, these expectations of how they're going to feel, or what it's going to be like. They have no idea. I say to them, you've never done this before.
No.
So you may think this is what might be, but you don't know. It might be totally different. Exactly what you said, Red. You might get there and you might enjoy this. So often the anticipation of these things often can be worse than the reality of what they experience in those things.
Sure.
Now, sometimes it's the other way, but in most cases, I think people assume that it's going to be very, very hard and difficult. And in many cases, it's not as bad as they thought, and maybe even more helpful than they thought. So getting control of those expectations are a huge thing.
I think too, if you're the family or friends of that person, that it should be okay to mention the person who's died.
Yes.
Because
Always.
to be in the presence of that person's loved one and not acknowledge it, the not acknowledging it would be even worse, because it was like they weren't even there. They didn't even exist. And so this person's going to be top of mind to whoever this other person might be. And so I think that for those around the I think we think of a spouse or a parent or whatever, or a child. If we don't pull the deceased person into the present and include them in the celebration, then somehow the exclusion of their name is almost worse, right?
I remember I had a a family, and they had an infant less than 6 months who died, and this family went down to visit their parents at Christmas in another province. And when they come back, and I saw Mom, and she was just heartbroken, set way back, and she said, nobody, not my parents, not my siblings, nobody spoke her name. Nobody mentioned her name.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right. As hard as we think it is, those are the things that in our grief, we need to be inclusive of them in this and recognizing that.
And that might be the very thing that helps soften the situation, that allows maybe joy to come through, to rise, is that acknowledgement that this is a happy time, but for this year, it's also a sad time.
Right. It's both.
Yep. And they can coexist.
And I'm thinking how that can come out in just simple ways. Like, I'm thinking if I'm the person hosting that event, and I want to honor the fact that your partner is not with you, it's something as simple as saying, so did you guys have a favorite tradition that you did at Christmas? Or what was his favorite, Christmas food? Like, was he turkey or was he a ham guy? All right. Or favorite Christmas carol, or, what's one of your favorite Christmas memories together? Like, even if you just want to kind of, keep it focused on the Christmas thing, not that it needs to be, but there's really such simple ways. If you're at the person's house, tell me about these ornaments that are here. Is there any significance to those?
I've many families that I've worked with over the years at Christmas dinner have set a place for the person.
Yes.
And
we did that.
Just set the place.
Yeah.
And the acknowledgement. What that says is the acknowledgement.
Yes.
That they're part of it, but we miss them.
Yeah.
And it's not, there's nothing strange about that. It's a very healthy recognition and inclusion of that person. So you're right.
Lighting a candle is another one.
Lighting a candle,
and as long as it isn't lit and everybody comes in and think, oh, there's a lovely scented candle, but that there's some sort of, we're lighting this candle in honor of and in memory of, and so that people know what that single candle is burning for.
That's right.
Right.
So let's broaden the discussion to grief in general. So, we know that it can be 6 months or 6 years or a couple decades, and something like Christmas can come up and roar. There it is, sitting there for a moment. Or maybe it's just that there's something particularly provocative about the season for you, and it's just a struggle. And I know people. I'm thinking of someone I know who felt like her grief was really, well, like she was carrying it okay, but the Christmas season was just particularly painful for her.
And I think that's where it's worth exploring the idea of, okay, is it important for me to maintain that traditional Christmas with all of those pieces? Or is this something that maybe it's time for me to initiate new rituals that represent my life now?
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about an avoidance of the grief, but I'm thinking that as we know, grief has both, that it's trying to say, okay, what is my life going to be like now without that person here? So it's a different world. And some people want that nothing to change. That's important for them. It's healing. It's kind of refreshing for them to have that. But other people might need to say, you know, that my life is different now, and maybe it's time for me to introduce, not totally every once a year, but maybe it's time for me to introduce some things that represent not just who I am now, but where I'm going.
Yeah.
And that can be a way of helping our grief to still be with us, but not to be laden in the memories of the tradition that we've always had to do.
So I'm not a new person. I'm a different
I'm a
person.
different
My
person.
life is different.
Right.
And giving myself permission for some of the way that I do
Right.
this holiday to be different
Right.
as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, is the tradition a shackle?
Right.
Right? Or is it something that is malleable? Right?
So sorry for me laughing, but you just triggered a memory. I had a woman. She said, I asked her after Christmas how it went. She said, "Oh, it was a good Christmas. I threw out every ornament." And she said, "My husband bought them all, and I hated them all in years, so I just threw them all out and bought new ones."
Good for her.
So I'm thinking about the shackles.
Right, right. But that's that flexibility we were talking about earlier, is that it's okay. I mean, that's how traditions get started. Someone starts them, right? And someone initiates something new into what previously existed. And then that thing becomes a new tradition. And so there's always space to create new. But again, it takes that sense of permission. It takes that sense of allowing yourself the freedom to do it.
Mm-hmm. Now it gets a little complicated if there's younger children that are involved in that. So sometimes we want to keep those traditions for children, you know, as that memory piece. So sometimes we have to recognize, you know, where we're at and where our family is at and what is possible and what we may have to postpone a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think, the themes that keep coming up are the letting go of expectations, permission, right? Just permission to be malleable, to be flexible, and this permission to feel, right? We've talked about this so many times, just permission to allow whatever's there to be there. And I always say to people, why would you allow it to be there? Because it's already there, right? Like, we're just making room for what is here in the moment. Recognizing that all moments change into other moments. And so in this one moment, we're feeling a certain way. In another moment, it's a different experience of that. And that is also about dropping those expectations of that romanticized idea of that it's been, wow, I was a bit of a failure at Christmas for my kids because I wasn't happy all the time because I'm missing my parent that I've just lost, for example. No, like, let's not, let's be a little more, let's give ourselves a little more grace, be a little more generous with ourselves than that.
Yeah. You gave the best Christmas it could be, given where you were at.
That's right.
Yeah.
And giving yourself permission to say, I don't have the energy to do everything I used to do. And I don't have the energy maybe even to make a full dinner. So recognizing that energy level is much, much lower. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it's going to be like this next year. Mm-hmm. But this year, this is what I have to do in order to make this the best we can, but also recognizing where we're at. So.
Perfectionism is not your friend.
No.
Is not a compassionate ally with you.
No.
On this road. Yeah. So some final thoughts.
It's a tough time. It's a tough time because of we want it to be something special, but so if we're living with someone with a life-threatening illness, we want it to be something meaningful. If we're in grief, we still want to try to make something meaningful, but it's not going to be like anything we've done before. So finding the support we need, for me, I think it's important to have an ally in this, whether that's another family member or friend who you can say, look, here's, help me here, protect me if you need to, if I
Mhm.
need that moment. But just, I may need that extra support to be able to do what I can do this Christmas and not to feel like I have failed.
Just working off of that, David, you made me think, and when you said, and it doesn't mean that all Christmases are going to be like this. And so, if we can allow one Christmas to be a little bit different, and we can allow that one Christmas to maybe not have the energy. It doesn't mean that every subsequent Christmas is going to be the same. And I think that we think this is what Christmas is now. I'm going to be like this all the time. And Christmas, like the second Christmas might also be a little bit more difficult, but you might find you have a little bit more energy too. But I think that understanding that Christmases will get better and traditions will not be lost if we don't practice them for 1 year, right? That they'll come back if they need to come back, they'll come back.
Right.
That's right.
But I think sometimes when we're so focused in on the moment and we can't see past that cloud, it's hard to give it up. But I think if we understand that we're not giving it up forever, but we're being good to ourselves this year, and we're giving ourselves that break to just be ourselves, then it makes doing that maybe a little easier because we know the traditions that will come back.
And finding the support. Sorry,
Yep.
one more thing.
Yep.
Finding the support you need.
Yep.
So there are, the funeral homes, many churches offer special services for grief and the holidays. So if that's something that may be helpful for you to be among other people in those moments.
Yeah, have a moment, those moments of
then look
gathering.
for that. Right. Yeah.
And me too. One more. I think the acknowledgement that it is sad is important. The acknowledgement that there is somebody missing and the acknowledgement of that person is so important.
Well, and I wanted to say there is meaning in your grief. I often say to people, we don't grieve when we lose something or someone. We don't grieve if it didn't matter, if they didn't matter, right? So there's meaning to your grief. And so it isn't something to be, avoided or suppressed or judged for. And it doesn't matter how long it's been since the loss. There's meaning there because the meaning is about the significance, the importance of that person, of that love, of that relationship, of the impact and the contribution that they made. And so the presence of that grief is not a problem. There's great meaning there to make space for. Any final thoughts?
Yeah. I think that's why the acknowledgement of it is so important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Any final thoughts, blessings you want to send out? I want to send out blessings to whoever's listening to this. A blessing to be kind and compassionate with your heart, with yourself.
Well said.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to What Now? On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. What Now is produced in partnership with Hospice Peterborough. Music by Paradise Garage. Technical support by Sean Heichert. What Now is recorded at Thin Spaces Studios. You can find more episodes of What Now for free on most major podcast platforms, including Spotify, CastBox, Apple Podcast, and Overcast. If you want to support us, please follow and leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts, and tell your friends. It does make a difference.